Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about promotions. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, is it worth getting promoted as a software engineer? It seems the money isn't worth the extra work and meetings. Well, I would say that it depends a little bit on what you like doing and what company that you're in. So, for example, if you're a junior software developer, then getting a promotion is hopefully pretty much an ambition of yours, because the difference between, say, a junior and a mid-level software developer in terms of responsibilities and so forth is not that great. It doesn't really mean that you have any more or less to do, and in many cases the senior has the same sort of situation, because it really comes down to a specific company usually. So what I like to say is that when you look for work as a software developer, it's pretty important for you to have a little bit of a, well, to understand yourself a little bit, where, and be a little bit honest with yourself where you are in your career, what you are good at, what you're not so good at, because you might thrive in one environment, in one specific company, or you might collapse and crash. And it really comes down to you and under what circumstances you will perform well, and in what type of role you're going to perform well. So I've seen many times, as an example, software developers who can't really cut it in one team, and in another team they can perform as expected. And that's not necessarily because they're good or bad. It can be, absolutely, but it can also be down to the circumstances of doing work. Because I hope that that doesn't come like a shock to you. There's a lot of companies and a lot of teams around the world who don't really do all that well, who are poorly organized and have a lot of weird expectations and flawed designs in their ways of working or in the system and things like that. And that basically means that what's true in one situation may not necessarily be 100% true in another one. There are absolutely all things that are always going to be the same, but it's not a given that just because you did well or poorly in one situation, then it's going to be the same thing somewhere else. So being a senior software developer, for example, in one team might mean that, well, you basically do just exactly the same sort of work as the juniors and the mid-levels. It's just that you have, of course, an expectation on you to perform at a higher level, which I hope makes sense. But in another, it might be that you have to do tons of meetings, and for all intents and purposes you are what we call the tech lead. You have to put in some extra effort. That could be true in other companies as well. It's very, very common that extra hours, for example, that has nothing to do with your work. Usually it doesn't really have anything to do with your level, like especially if you're in a small company where you might have to work overtime even as a junior just to meet the deadline or something like that. And in another company that's unheard of, because it's just a company that runs in a different way. So if we just make that distinction, that just because you get promoted doesn't necessarily mean that you have more meetings, and it might be exactly the same thing. Let's just talk a little bit about what it means to get higher and higher, and then I can speak about sort of the path that I have had and the main differences I have seen in my role as my career has progressed. So, as I like to say, when you start as a junior software developer, the only responsibility practically you have is to get the code working, more or less. Nobody's going to expect you to write good software or flawless software or anything like that. It's about just producing something. Mid-level, very similar, just a higher expectation on you to be autonomous. Juniors are usually excused for asking for help more often and things like that. You have more of a, well, you can think about it a little bit like a adult has some, you leave some wiggle room for mistakes for a small child or something like that, or a kid. But when you get to be a mid-level, you're getting to be a teenager or like a young adult or something like that, and now the expectations are growing on you. And when you're a senior, you're more or less expected to be a full-fledged adult within the programming world. But once you go past that point, now you're talking about being a tech lead or a staff engineer or a principal engineer or an architect or things like that. Now is the first time where it's almost definitive that you're going to have meetings or synchronization. It's not, once again, it's not 100% true. I have worked with quite a lot of principals, engineers, and staff engineers and so forth where it's just that they have more knowledge about the system. They are doing the work of a senior. They don't necessarily have all that more or that more many meetings or anything like that. But for most of us, that is what it means. And so whether or not the money is worth it for you or not, it depends on like how much do you value it. All I can say is that when I was a junior and I only did coding and so forth, and well, where I am now, well, I've roughly more than tripled my salary, and it's probably going to get higher still because I have some a little bit higher to go still if I wanted to get to the highest levels, at least in my region. And the trust and well, work some circumstances that I find myself in are very, they're very agreeable to me. It's I can't, of course, just if my goal was to only do the coding, then yeah, this is definitely not for you. If that's what your goal is, or if it had been my goal, my goal is perhaps different from you. But I can tell you that in terms of what I had to sacrifice, there is this idea for some that just because you get up to be a tech lead or something like that you just have to abandon all your coding. I aim to prove them wrong, because being a tech lead still means quite a lot of coding. You will have to usually take some more holistic responsibility, but you're still going to do a lot of coding. Not 100%, but depending on the team, again, it can vary between 80%, 20%, 20%, 80%. Like, it very much depends. Where I am right now, I have the role of a principal engineer in a company where, like, the work circumstances that I have here were different from my last role, which was a staff engineer, and for all intents and purposes you can think of those as interchangeable. And so in the previous company I did basically exactly the same amount of coding as everybody else, but I out-earned most of the seniors because I also had to do some meetings here and there and like make sure that all the rituals are working and things like that and so forth. And in this company I can basically come up with any suggestions that I want. So if I wanted to spend all my time coding practically, then I could in theory if I wanted to, but I also have to make sure that I coach, I train people, like these sorts of other things, which is, as I said, the higher up you get, the more of that you will see. But it doesn't mean necessarily that you're not going to do any coding or anything like that. So if you really hate meetings and you really don't want to do any extra stuff and just focus on your coding, then yeah, nothing over senior is going to be interesting to you usually. It might be possible with a tech lead here and there and so forth, depending on like how sensitive you are to this. But I want to make that super clear, guys. I'd like to think at the very least I haven't really lost a step in terms of my coding prowess just because I became a principal. The only difference is that now I have larger responsibilities. I used to be responsible for, say, one team or maybe two teams, and now at this level I'm like last company 7 teams, now it's like 18 teams, and I still have to sit in with a few meetings here and there, but my schedule has become much more flexible, and I still do pair programming with the developers who need it or like want it. I still write a lot of libraries and stuff like that, and the fun part about it is that if you can earn the trust of your employer, they will let you do a lot of those sorts of improvements that were kind of hard to sell when you were just a software developer who was expecting to just deliver on some deadline. So what I want you to take away from this is that I think that if you really don't like meetings, if you want to minimize any risk you have of social interaction or extra responsibilities or fluff work or administrative work, then yeah, nothing above senior is going to be interesting to you, because the higher up you go, the larger your surface area is going to become. But I want you to understand that just because you become a staff engineer or a tech lead or something like that, that doesn't mean that you're going to lose all your tech skills. Because as I said, it really depends on the circumstances. I have positioned myself in such a way that I act much more as a technical expert, where I consult on things that I know to be true. So very similar to how we here sit and talk, or I talk, let's be honest here, and you try, hopefully listen and take in some of the things that I'm saying about my experience as a software developer. I do exactly the same sort of thing, much more hands-on, of course, with my own software teams and within my own company. So you will see in my current job, for example, I have a repository with reusable shared libraries, guides for how to do things, practices and recommendations for how to run teams, for how to do development work, how to I like to make starter packs for a lot of teams, like where I have, say, teams with junior level software developers who are a little bit unsure on how to, say, set up a new project. So I create an slightly opinionated starter pack, and I tell them, here's how I would do it if it was me who did it. You are very welcome to just not use this or just use parts of it, but here is something that can get you started, and that is going to help you set up all the pipelines and all the stuff that you need, because I have all that knowledge, right? And then if they want help, they can reach out to me, and when I'm not helping someone improve in coding or try to coach someone and so forth, I work on a range of more complicated problems, as I like to call them, which is the thing that I find interesting. Depending on what it is, it can be, sadly enough, for those of you who don't like it, a bunch of meetings. I have to write some documentation and take a bunch of meetings with a bunch of architects and decide on some stuff. And in some cases, it's building a custom library for the teams, so that I have to sit down and figure out, okay, we have all of these different systems. They all need to synchronize in some fashion, or report metrics or whatever have you. And then I basically sit down and I code all day long, because that is what is necessary. So my role is very flexible in that regard, and that is because I have positioned myself in the way that this is what I want, because I want to be able to have that flexibility, and my employer was okay with it, and they hired me to do that job. In another company that may not be possible, and that's what I want you to understand. Your circumstances and how good or how bad it is with salary to meetings and extra work ratio very much depends on you, what expectations you put on your company, and what types of roles they can offer you in that company. Have a great day.